It is Wednesday, my dudes, which means it's time for another First Thoughts and Initial Impressions Epic 7 video. This one will be on Byblis, Achates' older sister, and the newest limited hero that was just shown earlier this morning on YouTube. Yes, there was some debate on whether or not this character would be limited. Seems that's the case. Regardless, I will go over my 2 cents on the character in this video. Do I think she's good? Where will I play her? What kind of equipment and artifacts? All those things you've come to expect from me in an impressions video. Before we jump into her S3 animation, I do want to point out that there is a giveaway accompanying this video. During the holidays, I like to give back to my community, and this year it will be through a signed print of Peyra from her English voiceover artist, Jeannie Tirado. So if you want to learn how to win this, check out the end of the video for more details.
The best time to prune a flower is when it's in full bloom. You can run all you like, but in this garden, there are no exits. Please follow my instructions.
While not my favorite animation of the year, I do like the camera angle they show temporarily behind her back. It kind of gives her this kind of sinister, sharp tongue feel that they were talking about in her lore, and overall feels very anime-esque. Speaking of anime-esque, in the English dub of Epic 7, Byblis is voiced by Brittany Cox. You most likely have heard her as Ingrid from the Fire Emblem franchise, and if not, then you may have heard her as Fischl from a little-known game called Genshin Impact. Taking a look at Byblis' stats, she is an Ice Ranger of the Pisces zodiac symbol, which means she shares a stat line with the Scourge of Epic 7, Lua. She has 993 attack, 611 defense, 6,002 health, 120 base speed, 15% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, no starting effectives or effect resistance, and of course dual attack chance is 3%. Translates to overall pretty good bulk for a ranger, and really high speed as well for a character in Epic 7, but obviously every other stat is going to be below average to average. Imprint release for the team is going to be health percentage, and imprint concentration is effectiveness, which is a surefire way of saying that this character is probably a debuffer or has some way to remove buffs in some capacity before we even look at the kit. Speaking of the kit, let's do a once-over of that now. Skill 2 is Gardener's Secret. When an ally suffers a counterattack, activates I'm Warning You. Can only be activated once per turn. I'm Warning You is an AoE attack that decreases buff durations by 1 turn and has a 50 to 70% chance, depending on Malagora, to decrease the defense of all enemies for 2 turns before increasing the combat radius of Byblis by 20%. Skill 3 is Alorunda's Hospitality. You acquire 2 souls upon use, and it has an impressively short 3 to 4 turn cooldown depending on Malagora. Attacks all enemies with a specially prepared gift, decreasing buff durations by 1 turn and decreasing hit chance for 2 turns before granting a barrier to all allies for 2 turns. Barrier strength increases proportional to the target's health. And finally, the basic skill, Floral Arrangement, attacks the enemy with a magical flower with a 50 to 75% chance to silence the target for 1 turn. After attacking, if the target is inflicted with silence, decreases combat radius of the target by 20%. Soul Burn for the cost of 10 souls increases the effect chance to 100%. Now that we know the kit, let's break down the entire character, and since we're already talking about the basic skill, I'll get that one out of the way first. It's just Angel of Light Angelica's S1. We've seen it before. We know it's good. We know the Soul Burn is good in a pinch. Moving on. Let's now re-talk about Gardener's Secret as well as its activated component, I'm Warning You, as this is pretty much the best part about the character. It is the meat and potatoes of her, so to speak. We don't have a character that punishes counterattacks quite in the way that Byblis does, and that's probably why she is a limited character. Essentially, you take your turn, they counter you, you counter back on your turn, and the counter that you deliver is actually fairly potent. Decreasing buff durations by 1 turn is nice, not exactly the best, but I think if it was a full strip, or just buff strips in general, it would be kind of insane, because after that, you get a 70% chance to defense break the entire enemy team for 2 turns. Not 1, but 2 turns, and you get a CR push on top of it. That's really, really strong. It reminds me of Tranquility, which is the activated component of Politis' S2 passive, Astral Guide. There's a condition that needs to be satisfied. If you trigger it, you get a AoE attack that reduces buff durations, does a decent chunk of damage, causes disruption, and then you get a combat readiness push on top of that. So this is very akin to that, but I'd argue it's even better because a 2-turn defense break is kind of game ending, and then on top of that, it has a more prevalent condition, I would say, for cleave-based teams than somebody activating a non-attack skill. One of the things about Byblis and Selene and the like is that you can play around those characters by not activating a non-attack skill unless your character has some kind of passive component, such as, like, say, maybe Senya, that you can't help it and it will cause a trigger. All Byblis needs to trigger is just a counter, and if you're familiar with the hero pool and the metagame, then you probably shouldn't have a problem fishing for it. And if your opponent doesn't counter, well, then you're probably just winning that game anyways, aren't you? And even if they do counter, again, hey, it's a 2-turn defense break with a combat readiness push that lets you go right into her S3, Alorunda's Hospitality. This thing also feels like Achates and her S3 because largely it's an AoE attack with a blind stable to it. But this one gives you a barrier, which is actually quite good. Note that it does say barrier strength increases proportional to the target's health, which I think means that if you target like a tank with this, when you select the move, you get more health. I don't know. We'll have to see the multipliers. Let me know down in the comments if you figure out how that actually works. Would love to know. But yeah, this thing is actually pretty good as well because it further decreases buff duration, so your opponent can't really have skills. And then on top of that, not only will they most likely have a 2-turn defense break, but they'll also be blinded, which is a really bad spot to be in. Do keep in mind that the S2 passive will reset at the start of Byblis' turn, which means that if your opponent counters you, you can proc the S2, I'm warning you, get the CR push, use Alorunda's Hospitality. If that move triggers a counterattack, then you will once again activate I'm warning you, which is really good at keeping your opponent off of buffs, but it also kind of lends itself to how I'm thinking this character is most likely played. So I've made the comparison already to Achates, and that makes me think that this character probably is going to be built in a very similar way. You might see her as somebody that is kind of very slow with a lot of damage, so that way when you get this hypothetical S2 into S3 into S2 follow-up, she does decent damage to the opponent. Basically just kind of cleaves through them, kind of helps with a cleave-based strategy. That's one way you could go about it. Another way would be just to forego damage altogether, play her kind of like a mid-speed with good bulk and effectiveness. Think of characters like Death Dealer Ray or Solitary of the Snow. That's how I'm kind of thinking that this character is played based off of those two skills. Feels, again, very Achates-esque in my opinion. Probably better than Achates is now, because I think since we've gotten Abyssal Euphine, that character isn't exactly in the best spot. Byblis on paper feels like she doesn't do a whole heck of a lot, but I think in practice, once we get some time with her, people will start to realize the comparison I'm making here to Achates, where she's kind of just this really good pickup for cleave-based strategies, or if you're trying to specifically punish something in general, like a Navy Captain Landy, or maybe like a martial artist Ken, or an Abyssal Euphine, which you shouldn't have too much issue with because, well, that's the metagame right now. In PvP, those characters are incredibly common. Let's move on now and talk about the artifact Old Gardening Shears. After using an attack that targets all enemies except for a basic skill, has a 60% chance to inflict a random debuff on the target for 1 turn, and a 50 to 100% chance to grant stealth to the caster for 1 turn based on artifact level. Can only be activated once per turn, and the random debuffs can be decreased attack, decreased speed, unhealable, or silence. Originally, when I saw this thing, I was not too keen on it. Now I think it's actually kind of good for that second build that we talked about, that mid-speed build with good bulk and good effectiveness, because in the hypothetical scenario where your opponent counters, you proc I'm warning you, get the CR push, activate the S3 Alorunda's Hospitality, and you proc get a second counter, then you will again proc the I'm warning you passive component, which is just insane. Think about it. That's 3 AoE attacks in rapid succession, which means that you have a very good chance of hitting them with blinds, defense break, maybe decrease speed, maybe silence or unhealable. That's a lot of debuffs coming out of 3 attacks. And the barrier, hopefully from a Larunda's Hospitality, should protect you a little bit. So there's definitely something here with this artifact. If you want to play her no damage as a disruptor, I could definitely see Old Gardening Shears being very, very good for her. For other characters, I'm not really sure on it. I don't really think it's particularly great. People kept saying it's another Guiding Light variant. For those of you who are newer players who haven't been around since Cerise was first released, Guiding Light originally didn't give stealth at the start of the battle and had a condition that gave you stealth at the end of her turn, and it was considered unplayable. So the stealth is not the main reason to be playing this artifact, in my opinion. I think it is entirely the Sierra Ren style passive that gives you the debuffs whenever you land an AoE attack. And as we've already demonstrated, similar to Politis, where you get a trigger to get an S2 into an S3, or just the God scenario of getting S2 into S3, get a counter proc S2 again. Those are the scenarios where I think Old Gardening Shears is very good, because you will get a decent amount of debuffs on your team, your opponent's team, I should say, and that's going to give you a lot of value and hopefully allow you to snowball out of control. So those are my thoughts on Byblis as well as her artifact. I think that you should roll for her because she is limited. I always advocate that you roll for a limited character. They are super, super important. And even if they're not good now, if they get buffed, the fact that they're not accessible all the time, you're going to end up regretting it. How I'd play her, like I said, either try her as a damage dealer, how you would play Politis and Cleave. Otherwise, go for that mid-speed disruptor. Don't really think that there are too many other crazy ways to try her. I don't think I would really recommend going for like counter or something like that. Maybe there's something like quirky with injury, for example. But yeah, those are pretty much my thoughts on the character, the builds, and then of course, like I said, artifact. It's probably going to end up being either Guiding Light or her own. So we have one final thing to do before wrapping up the video, and that is the topic of the giveaway that I mentioned in the beginning. So it is the holiday season, and I do want to give back to my community. So here it is, a signed print of Peyra from her English voiceover artist, Gini Tirado. This is a free giveaway for everyone. All you need to do is simply join my Discord, which is linked down in this video's description, and check out the giveaway channel for the pinned message for the full details to actually enter. If you want a second chance to actually enter this contest and have a chance to win a signed print of Peyra, then I recommend this Saturday checking out Divine's big end of the year Epic 7 Bash. It is a charity themed event that he has been working on for a while. I will be participating in it, and one of the prizes that you can win is, yes, another signed copy of this Peyra print by, again, Miss Gini Tirado. So you have 2 ways to enter, either through my giveaway or through Divine's charity stream this weekend. So definitely check that out. I will link his Twitch along with the schedule down in this video's description. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Let me know how you feel about Byblis down in the comments below. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll catch you in the next one. Later.